Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share a brand new story every day. If you enjoy my videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. The town of Whittier, Alaska, had always been a place that intrigued those who dared to venture into its isolated confines. Nestled on the western edge of Prince William Sound, it was a small, eerie town with a population of less than 200. The only way in was through a tunnel, a dark and foreboding passage carved into the heart of a mountain. It was a place where daylight seemed reluctant to enter proud, and where the shadows of the past lingered like mist over the frigid waters. Elena McCarthy felt a chill creep up her spine as she drove through the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel. The 2.5-mile-long stretch was a harrowing experience, with the jagged rock walls seemingly closing in on her with every passing second. She had heard stories about Whittier, whispers of hauntings, tales of a ghost town that had never quite shed its military past. But Elena was a journalist, and she was here to uncover the truth. As she emerged from the tunnel, the town of Whittier greeted her with an unsettling stillness. The buildings were a mixture of old military structures and newer utilitarian constructions. But it was the Buckner Building, looming over the town like a specter, that immediately drew her attention. The massive, decaying structure was once a fortress, a place meant to protect and serve. Now, it was nothing more than a relic of a bygone era, abandoned and left to the elements. The Buckner Building was named after General Simon Buckner, a tough and determined military leader who had once commanded the defenses of Alaska. The building, completed in 1953, was a testament to Cold War paranoia. It was designed to house over 1,000 soldiers and could withstand bombings, earthquakes, and other disasters. Inside, it had everything: a movie theater, a bowling alley, a jail, and even tunnels that connected it to other parts of the town. But that was decades ago. Now, the building was a shell of its former self. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it crude, some of it unsettlingly familiar. The word "Redrum" was scrawled in large letters on one of the walls, a clear reference to The Shining. Elena couldn't help but shiver as she stood outside the entrance, her breath visible in the cold Alaskan air. Ted Spencer, the curator of the Whittier Museum, had agreed to show her around. A grizzled man in his late 60s, Ted had lived in Whittier for most of his life. He knew the town's history better than anyone, and he had his own share of ghost stories to tell. As they stepped inside, the air grew noticeably colder. The once grand hallways were now silent, save for the occasional creak of old floorboards and the distant sound of dripping water. Ted led Elena through the building, his flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. They passed through what was once a cafeteria, then a recreation room. Everything was covered in dust, and the furniture was in various states of decay. But it was the auditorium that gave Elena pause. As they entered the large, dark room, she felt a strange sensation, as if she were being watched. Ted moved the beam of his flashlight across the room, revealing rows of decaying seats and a stage that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "I was exploring this place once," Ted said, his voice echoing off the walls, "and I didn't even realize I was standing on the stage. It's spooky, isn't it?" Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of the room. There was something about the Buckner Building, something that felt alive despite its derelict state. Elena spent the next few days exploring Whittier, interviewing the town's residents, and piecing together the town's history. The more she learned, the more she realized that the Buckner Building wasn't the only place in Whittier with a haunted past. The Begich Towers, the 14-story building where nearly all of Whittier's residents lived, had its own share of ghost stories. People talked about hearing footsteps in empty hallways, objects moving on their own, and strange noises in the middle of the night. One of the residents, Bob Prunella, a former city manager, had even reached for his gun when he heard someone, or something, rattling around in his kitchen, only to find nothing there. Diana Barnes, the executive assistant for the city, was more reserved in her stories. She admitted that there were things she couldn't explain, but she was reluctant to talk about them in detail. "They haven't hurt anybody," she said with a nervous smile. "We just live with it." As Elena dug deeper, She discovered that the town's haunted reputation went back to the Good Friday earthquake of 1964. The earthquake had caused massive damage to Whittier, and the Buckner building had been severely affected. It was after the earthquake that the military pulled out, leaving the building and perhaps something else behind. On her last night in Whittier, Elena decided to visit the Buckner building one final time. She had been inside during the day, but she wanted to see it at night, to experience the building in its most eerie state. The town was quiet as she made her way to the building. The wind howled through the empty streets, and the sky was a dark, impenetrable black. As she entered the building, she was immediately struck by how different it felt. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from her flashlight, and the silence was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. She walked through the halls, past the graffiti-covered walls, and into the auditorium. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Suddenly she heard it, a faint sound, like a whistle, coming from somewhere deep within the building. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound grew louder, and then she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, echoing through the empty halls. Elena's heart pounded as she backed away, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The footsteps were getting closer, but she couldn't see anyone. It was as if the building itself had come to life, the ghosts of its past finally making themselves known. With a surge of adrenaline, Elena turned and ran, the sound of the footsteps chasing her all the way to the exit. She burst out into the cold night air, her chest heaving as she looked back at the building. The Buckner building stood there, silent and still, but she knew that someone, was inside. She didn't look back as she hurried to her car and drove away from Whittier, the shadows of the Buckner building fading into the distance. But even as she left the town behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had brought a part of it with her, that the ghosts of Whittier had found a new place to haunt. Months later, Elena's article about Whittier was published, and it caused quite a stir. Readers were captivated by the town's eerie history and the haunted Buckner building. But for Elena, the story was far from over. Every now and then, late at night, she would hear the faint sound of footsteps in her apartment, footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere, but grew louder with each passing night. And sometimes, when the wind howled just right, she could almost hear a whistle, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the darkness. Elena knew then that Whittier had never really let her go. The shadows of the Buckner building would be with her forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.